Excellent. So welcome everyone. I think we're on live now. Success.
Yes, we are. I can see the notification.
You can see I have to just shut down my little thing and I will make sure that I read out any comments that we have, which I'm sure we will. So welcome to the Business of Property, everyone, on Property Development Australia. We have some really exciting guests. Not that we don't usually have exciting guests, but Goro, Gupta, and Joseph, Nicole from Empowered Liveability. Not very easy for my Asian slang to say. Thank you. But we're talking about NDIS today, which is a very, very hot topic. And really, it's, Goro, I'll ask you to do a bit of an intro about what it is that your team and do together. And I know you've got different businesses as well, so it'll be good to understand what those businesses do. But it is, a lot of people are very keen. NDIS comes up all the time. I tag you all the time on people asking about how to set things up. The returns sound great. It's government guaranteed, but we want to be able to say, hey, this is the real. It is great. However, this is the reality of it as well. It's not something that you go into lightly. So, Goro, feel free to introduce yourself and your team as well.
Hi, my name is Goro. So I'm the co-director of Empowered Liveability and also the director of a company called 10 Properties in 10 Years. We got into the NDI space about 3 years ago now. Nicole will talk about how that started, but my role within Empowered Liveability is strategy and finance. And as a company, we're encompassing where we've got strategy and finance, building knowledge, and the most important component, which is extensive disability background and knowledge. And today we're going to be talking about the reason why we call demystifying NDIS housing and not invest in NDIS housing is because there's a lot of myths and misconceptions out there. We want to talk to people today about the realities behind what's on the ground as, representing effectively what is one of the largest privately owned NDIS housing providers in the country. We'll talk about how that works, how we got here, and if you want to get into that space, what it looks like and what it doesn't look like as well. So I want to leave it over to, over to Nicole, who's next on my screen, to introduce herself.
Hi guys, my name's Nicole Doherty. I'm one of the co-directors of Empowered Liveability as well. My background is very much in community services, so disability, aged care, mental health, drug and alcohol, as a case manager, counsellor, trainer for the last 20 years. So I guess thought I was going into specialist disability accommodation with my eyes wide open, and that could not have been less true. And that's with a lot of sector knowledge as well. So we started from me kind of wanting to build one SDA property and heading to Goro and Joseph to have a chat about that and, making that a reality for me. So I was looking at doing some just general property investing, and my sister had actually suffered a spinal cord injury. So not only was I working in the sector, I was then sort of thrown in to, seeing it from the other side, from someone who was young, who had just bought her first home and potentially wasn't going to be going back to that home. So my brain sort of started ticking from the other side of the fence. And I took the idea to Goro and Joe and said, look, I've done a lot of research, I've done a lot of reading, I've read the legislations, I know the sector from the inside, I've got a lot of contacts, what can we make happen, and how can you guys help me make this a reality? And it very quickly turned into, we can do more than one house very, very quickly. And, let's put some, some serious, research into this and getting it off the ground. So, which kind of leads into Joe, literally into the, the land and the building side of things.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Nicole. It's really appreciated. Joseph Sulfaro. Predominantly background in property and real estate. I've worked in a variety of facets of real estate, but mainly development and projects. Through, I guess, my role within Empowered Liveability and also our other consortium group, is basically project management. So project management, ensuring that the designs of the builds aren't necessarily just built to what they stipulate in the guidelines. One thing that we learnt very on in the process was ensuring that we went over and beyond what was stipulated in guidelines, and made sure that we got all the necessary knowledge from the relevant parties to make sure that functionality was achieved in all purposes. And yeah, just sort of now managing the project nationally, which has been great, and very rewarding, but also very challenging as well. That's it for me this evening. But happy to answer any questions, but also contribute as much as I can to assist as well.
Thank you all for the intro. And let's start off with, I guess, and we mentioned this before, Nicole, with some terminology to begin. 101, we've got all these acronyms: SDA, NDIS, NRES, what else? Demystify that to begin with.
Yeah, definitely. So NDIS is thrown around quite a bit, and I'm sure people would have probably heard about it in the media as the National Disability Insurance Scheme. We work very closely with, they've kind of taken over from the old Department of Health and Human Services in terms of disability service. SDA is specialist disability accommodation, which is what we're talking about, these specific houses that we've built. And there's also SIL, which is spoken about quite a lot, which is supported independent living, which is the actual disability provider that provides the on-site service. So they're probably the main three.
And so what are the main components in an SDA home? You've got a provider. You've obviously got the home, which is what you guys help deliver. So who...
A really easy PowerPoint.
Here's one.
Let me put that on my screen.
When you've got so much fresh air and wind around you, you just get inspired to put PowerPoints together.
So we get asked this question all the time, right? And it is, let's be honest, it's bloody confusing because there's a lot of moving parts. Let me, I guess, put it up on my desktop, see if I can load it up, and then maybe I can share my screen and we can go through it, because there's a lot more to it than people understand. And if you don't understand from the top down, you're not going to understand it even through the build process. So
it's probably good to note as well that back before the NDIS was established, that this model of housing was the old group housing, where the one provider would literally, either own or lease the property. They would do the actual service delivery, and they would also then, basically do the property management within their own teams as well. So, and in some cases, their case manager or support coordinator, which is the person who, I guess, advocates for somebody with a disability to be able to get them into these types of housing. A lot of that back in the day was through the exact same company as well. So there was no transparency between who was providing which service. It was generally just all done with one service, and it was block funded, which means that a house would get a certain amount of funding, and that would be shared between the actual tenants, which wasn't always, a fair way of doing things, compared to now, where there's a lot more transparency, and the NDIS wants a lot more transparency between who provides the bricks and mortar, who does the actual service delivery in the house, who then advocates for the person living in the house, and who also then provides the ongoing tenancy and property management as well. So the more transparency between those means a lot more safeguards for the actual tenants as well.
Absolutely. Okay.
So it's loaded up on my end. I'll just share it on my screen.
Yeah, fabulous.
Hopefully that works. And here we go. I'll share it. Okay, can everyone see the screen here?
Yes,
okay.
There we are.
This is this is actually the simplified version of how it all works, believe it or not. Nicole, you'd agree with that, so would you, Joel, right? So most people only see the top layer. It's like an iceberg, right?
Yes.
Everyone sees the top layer. Landlord engages property developer who sources land and manages the construction, and the government magically pays rent. That's not how it works, right? You need an SDA provider in the middle, and Nicole will talk about the ins and outs of what's required to be a high quality SDA provider. Once again, that specialist disability accommodation provider. They're authorized by the government to receive the funds that need to be received, right? So Empowered Liveability, in this case, is the SDA provider. They lodge the relevant documents, work with the agencies to get the relevant approvals, and for that, the agency pays a set amount per participant that lives in the house. Finding the participants is also the SDA provider's responsibility. It is not the responsibility of the care provider. It's not the responsibility of the NDIS. So one of the key challenges is we hear there's 6,000 people stuck in nursing homes. There's all these stats about all these people that are going to receive SDA. Guess whose responsibility it is to find those tenants, right? It's the SDA provider's responsibility to not only find them, but to spend the time, and Nicole will talk about what that time looks like because it's not a small amount, to actually get the approvals so that NDIS can eventually pay, which they're quite frequently late on paying. That's a different story for a different. Also, their responsibility is to make sure that the people love the house that they're in, and create the partnership with the care provider, which you see on the right-hand side, to provide the care, and then provide the ongoing property management as a normal property manager. And then sort of, whether you call it a head lease arrangement or something else, really pay a set amount as a monthly rental to the landlord.
Yeah, too easy. So when do we get paid? So Sasha did ask if we can get a copy of this PowerPoint.
I'm happy to send a screenshot of this. There's no significant IP in there.
Okay, not a problem. But that is, I mean, that image itself, and it's really good way of also understanding where, I know you mentioned you've got the two businesses also, so it's not up there. You might leave that up there for a second.
Sorry,
yeah.
Yep.
I've got it on my double screen. Yeah. So where the SDA provider sits and who's sourcing the land, and also the roles and responsibilities. This creates a much clearer understanding of the different roles here. So anyone that's keen, this is the image that you need to have in your head to be able to go, all right, it's not just matching people. Yeah. So in which case, is it usually that an NDIS provider, the registered provider has a head lease? Because you mentioned a head lease there.
Sometimes it depends on the setup. We've chosen a head lease model because it makes sense, and because we have multiple people living in the one house. By the way, if you're looking to have more than 3 people, or if you hear of any providers with more than 3 people in the one house, that's called a group home. We or the NDIS both are not fans of group homes. So really, especially with the dual keys, if you see many people building them or you're trying to build one yourself, just be aware there's some significant scrutiny in the current market. Dual keys are not suitable for SDA long term.
Okay.
Really, for the Queenslanders, I know you guys love your dual keys out there. Consider duplex instead.
Right. So, and generally it's three bedrooms.
3 bedroom or 4 bedrooms. We usually have the 4th bedroom for either the overnight carer, which does overnight sleepovers, or 24/7 support.
Okay, fantastic. So, why is and this looks complicated on its own? Why is it not as easy as it may seem when we see all these little ads that say you get this 10-12% Goro's ripping his hair out? Good thing you have a good set of hair.
Yeah,
we made a complicated process as simple as possible. This is something that obviously that we sort of like to show our clients in a simplistic form. But yeah, that would be the ultimate answer essentially. So it's there's a few little, as you can see, there's a few little moving parts there in relation to how it all pieces together.
Yeah.
So Nicole can talk more specifically about tenancy onboarding and how the tenancy onboarding in relation to how it works with the care providers. That is essentially a process in itself. And as what Goro alluded to earlier, essentially then obviously then liaising with the NDIS and the other parties is where a significant amount of the time is spent. And that's I would say, and I'm sure the others agree with me, that is essentially a very simplistic view of
So,
what
I
actually
mean,
happens.
Yeah.
really briefly, what most people are seeing in those ads is the top part. Literally, the first line is what people see. They see the build it and they'll come, and they don't see all the work that goes on below. I'm about to hand it over to Nicole now to talk about the amount of work that goes on below that iceberg, because that's really what happens. No tenants, no NDIS work, no money, right? Let's call it what it is. Nicole, can I take it over to you about what we were told happened and what actually happens, and how much time we invest as a team to secure just one tenant or even four?
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably one of the biggest misconceptions about specialist disability accommodation funding is that I think, and from what I've seen, and I guess the more I talk about this, the more it pops up in my newsfeed about investors and property developers talking about these types of dwellings, is that it's almost like, here's this house and you're going to get this amount of money and this is the yield, and all of that real estate stuff that people talk about that isn't my forte at all. But the biggest misconception is that it's the house that actually receives the funding, which isn't the case at all. It's actually the individual participant who's living in the house. So if you have a house and one person moves in, you're only getting the amount for one person, even if you've got 4 or 5 bedrooms. So, and if nobody moves in, you're not having any money for, a significant period of time. And those levels, there's 4 different levels of SDA in terms of the actual participants. So there's the lowest level, which is intellectual disability, people who can walk around a house. There's fully accessible, which is someone who may need, say, a manual wheelchair, or may need some types of, walkers and things like that within the house and need no steps. There's robust, which is more for behavioural disabilities, so people who may actually engage in property damage. And there's high physical support, which is the highest level of support. So for people with really, really complex needs who require a lot of equipment and a lot of space to be able to move around their house, and obviously no steps again. The actual process for the tenancy has changed a couple of times, even over the last 3 years. There was a few different processes where you could go through the Department of Health and Human Services for their list, which is pretty much almost a fallacy. The only people on that list is really people with really, really high significant behaviours, or people on justice orders, or that are coming out of lockdown facilities. They're mostly the people on those lists.
These are not COVID lockdown facilities.
Yeah, that's right.
And we found that out the hard way along with everyone else. And I dealt with that list for probably 15 years of having clients on and off that list. And most of those were people with behaviours, to be honest. But the work behind actually going through, receiving an expression of interest, working out whether that person then is someone suitable to actually apply for the house, working out whether that's someone who engages in property behaviour or damage behaviour, or whether there's someone who will fit the level of specialist disability accommodation that we've actually built to. You might get heaps of applicants that are at the wrong level, which is often the case as well. And it's something that I've seen a lot of property developers talk about, how they've got lots of applicants to potentially fill the house, and they're quite careful with the way that they say that as well, because the potential is that we can get lots and lots of applicants, and we'll sometimes get 20 applicants for one house, but we may only have one person that's actually suitable, and then that one person may not match anybody else that comes along in the future. So it's quite a complex way of doing things, but it's probably the most important thing in terms of making sure that you have a long-term tenancy, and that it's sustainable as well, and that the people in the house that are living together are actually matched quite well, and there's no, conflicting behaviours or things that will trigger each other. So someone might need a really quiet house and they don't want anybody else who, makes a lot of noise, but then they might make a lot of noise. So
I have that issue in my house, right? we were mismatched.
Things are the best at that. We can't swap them around though, unfortunately.
Oh no, that's right.
That side of things is quite complex, and there's a lot of moving parts in that. And even times, for us, we might think we've got one person that's suitable to move into a house, and when we go to our provider, and we've got several still, which is the actual care providers, we've got several partners with that, and we may go to them and none of them think that person's suitable, even though we have thought. And that's even with our extensive experience in that. And we've got behaviour specialists that work with us as well to make sure that we're getting really, really good matches. And even sometimes it's just, it doesn't happen. And even if you think you've got a really good match, sometimes when they actually start living together, there's things that no one could have possibly, I guess, identified before they moved in that are, potentially at risk to each other, or with the two of them in there, it's then a risk to the staff. So there's a lot of moving pieces that I guess the average person wouldn't even consider, it wouldn't cross their mind when they're thinking about, here's a good investment opportunity, here's a good yield, that the house could sit there for a considerable period of time, despite what a lot of people say. It can sit there for a considerable period of time before you get a second tenant or a third tenant, which means that the yields are basically rubbish until the house is completely full.
So does it also then open up to that there are developers or people who are providing this sort of housing who are not doing the right thing and doing the right sort of matching?
Yes, yeah, we've had some feedback in that retrospect, and yes, that is very clear. And what we're finding as well is those who, I'd say, certain groups out there that are sort of just focusing on the investment side of things probably haven't done enough research or due diligence, or don't even have an accommodation provider in place that has houses up and running and can provide this sort of the capacity to actually deliver what's needed on the back end. As you could see previously in that chart there, it's really what's going on at the back end that is really going to drive the project to work. That's essentially, if you don't have that well looked after, it can go pear-shaped fairly quickly.
Yeah, and we're talking significant danger as well. Potentially, this is not, you've got people that are stuck in wheelchairs, and some people who may not, who all fit together, and then something happens. This is serious business. Like we're not mucking around here. This is someone's life.
Yeah, absolutely. Like stories about certain developers only sticking. That's why I referenced only sticking to what's in the guidelines. That's also something that I feel that a lot of investors or developers are going to get caught out in. We mainly do typically build what's called the high physical support category. We've had a lot of feedback from other builders and developers saying, "Oh, we're not putting in fire sprinklers into the home," which is just ridiculous. It's just crazy.
You're not putting fire sprinklers into a high physical support home. You're playing with someone's life.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, and even what Nicole was mentioning earlier before, a lot of investors and builders building to what's called the robust category. I would be strongly, highly recommending that no one even consider looking at that category for quite some time.
Until the NDIS sort themselves out.
Yeah, so, absolutely. Until the NDIS sort themselves out, absolutely. That is what we find, and I think Nicole mentioned this earlier, was tenants matching and property damage behaviour quite high in that category. So that's and I feel like the whole way the guidelines have been stipulated to build in that category isn't nowhere near up to scratch what's going to be actually suitable for the participant.
Yeah, and a lot of those people are on not just potentially justice orders, but they're on mental health orders. And in some cases they're coming out of places like the disability forensic services where they're actually on, they could be on sexual orders as well. So they could have, sexual behaviours, which means you're putting other people at risk if you're matching to those types of people as well. And often the NDIS gets it wrong. They will give people the wrong level of PA funding.
Right. Okay.
So you might get someone who's improved livability, and if you don't know what you're looking for, and it could even just be something as simple as, a medication that is quite specific to, a certain disorder. If you don't catch that, or someone doesn't catch that along the way, and you put, someone who potentially is really vulnerable into someone who potentially is quite predatory, and both of those things are quite prevalent in our industry, you're literally gambling with people's lives. And some of the stuff Joe was just talking about, that's literally the bricks and mortar, which is pretty, not easy. Obviously, that's not my industry, but what I see is kind of ticking off a checklist of what needs to be built to the Livable Housing Australia guidelines and those sorts of things as well. But going above and beyond that to what's actually going to work on the ground is quite different. But on top of that, it's fairly easy for someone to register as a specialist disability accommodation provider with NDIS, but to keep that registration and to actually go through all the auditing processes and, to make sure that they're actually living up to the actual service level agreements that they have with the providers is quite complex. It's definitely not an easy tick and flick and, and money for jam type of industry at all.
Yeah.
So Nicole, when Nicole, myself, and Joe, we spent, along with our other team members, we spent approximately 100 hours per resident of our properties. That makes 300 hours of work before we earn a single cent out of the whole project. That's the amount of work it takes from an expert point of view. If you are don't already have a disability background, it's going to take a hell of a lot longer than that. So these are some of the hard truths behind what it takes to get here.
Yeah. And Nicole, I mean, are people applying directly to you, or are they being assisted by, some sort of body or whichever?
Yeah, so people generally now apply directly to us, and that's been a lot of, I guess, our branding that we've worked on quite hard over the last 3 years, and I guess a lot of our industry connections and industry knowledge as well, and repeat support coordinators and repeat planners from the NDIS, coming back knowing that our houses are good quality, our providers are good quality, and that we have a service where it's literally end to end, where we're in every part of the actual the person's life, basically. But we also have, there are lots of tenant matching services out there that are charging huge amounts of money. And they're a bit of a worry as well, because they're literally, charging big money to give you potential tenants that may not go anywhere. They may not end up moving into your property. And if they do, they may stay very short periods of time if they're not all matched together as a group. If it's one person and moving into an apartment, that's a lot easier because you're not matching to other people. But then you're running the risk of, say, if someone has 10 apartments with 9 different people living in them, if one or two of them decide they don't like the provider that's doing all 9 people, it's going to be really hard for people to get all 9 people to change who they want as a provider. So the easiest thing for them to do is to move out.
Which I had 2 calls about today, by the way.
Yeah, which means you're going to have the vacancies back really quickly. So, our big thing is to work on long-term sustainable tenancy, and to take a little bit longer to make sure that those matches are right and that people get to meet each other before they move in, the families get to meet each other before they move in, and that service takes a long time.
Yeah.
And also, it does mean that the houses are empty for a longer period of time.
So how often, I mean, in terms of hands-on, because that's before people were moving in, the ongoing management and maintenance as well. Describe that to me, which I'm sure it's not going to be something that's short and succinct, but on a high level, how does that look?
Yeah, look, I suppose, considering that it's a shared accommodation, I said most of our houses in Melbourne now are operational. So they've got at least 2 tenants in them. I guess the general, I'd say most of it is is not too much outside of a normal tenancy in terms of maintenance requests. You get your block toilets and so forth. You are getting a little bit more wear and tear on the property as an overall, simply because of wheelchairs. They can easily, especially motorized wheelchairs, they can easily knock into a wall and so forth. So there's quite a few patch ups that need to be done. But I'd say, like, overall, it hasn't been. I wouldn't say that that's been a significant concern long term at this stage. What it is maybe you just got to sort of allow a little bit more for your overall maintenance of the property, considering the tenant's obviously disabled, so they can't the general upkeep of the properties beyond them, but also fire safety maintenance as well, which is a very important compliance part of it.
Okay.
We tell people to factor in roughly about $6,500 of holding costs.
Yeah, you're talking roughly about $6,500 for your annual outgoings. Yeah.
And on average, how long are these tenants staying for?
I've got them on 5-year subleases.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's long-term tenancy, 5-year subleases. They can move out anytime that they like. That's obviously part of the whole SDA framework, providing they give a 60-day notice.
Okay.
So part of our ethos as a company is we're a little bit rebellious. This is where Nicole, Joe, and we really get together. We really get together, and we do make sure that they enjoy living in the party. I think we're planning a cocktail party at one of the houses soon. We're taking some of our tenants to Tony Robbins whenever he decides to come back, or whenever we're allowed to have him back.
That's nice.
Yeah. So these are the things that we do from a heartfelt space, because, hey, we actually genuinely care about the people there. We've spent 100 hours trying to get them in the house. We need to make sure, A, yes, financially we keep them in the house, but B, we also are doing this from a heart-fueled place.
Absolutely.
That's really important.
Absolutely.
Ian's commented that he says subleases are great, but they move out when they like. Like you just mentioned, 60 days is not a lot of time, especially when you're taking that much time to find a replacement.
That's
it's quite hard for them to move out as a process.
Absolutely.
Because it takes us 100 hours. It's going to take someone else 100 hours to get that right as well.
Sure.
Yeah. We haven't had anybody move out that hasn't then moved into one of our other homes. So, and that's been more of a provider issue for a specific tenant than anything else. And the actual time, so the NDIS framework says that basically people can move out with short notice. That's their framework.
Yeah.
And technically, as SDA providers, you actually still get paid for a certain amount of time, the actual SDA payment. Somebody's moved out, but the actual time that it takes for someone to move from one house to another, even with the same provider, can be 3 or 4 months. Long period of time generally for you to be able to find more tenants. And if you're doing a good job, you've got a list of tenants, which is what we've been lucky to be able to build up. But also, I guess the good thing about that too is that for us, it pushes you to do a better job, because you don't want people to be able to to just move out on a whim. It's a lot of that conflict management as well, which, generally the actual service provider will be doing a lot of that day to day.
Absolutely.
It's biggest, that's where we get involved. And that's the good thing about having transparency between providers as well, is that if people don't feel like they can go to the actual care provider to say, I don't like your care, they can actually then come to us, and we can speak to all the tenants and say, well, does everybody feel like this? Are you not happy with the staff? Are you not happy with the provider? Because the good thing about SDA is that it's actually the provider that leaves. It's not the tenants. So if everybody in the house says, look, we don't like this provider, we want to try a different one, then in the old days, it was they had to leave. But now it's very much the tenant's home, and it's the provider that leaves and a new provider brought in to try. So that's a huge thing for people. And that's giving people, we haven't had anybody that said we don't want to sign a 5-year lease. We've had most people saying we want to be able to stay here for really long periods of time. And that's, we have 5 by 5 by 5 by 5. so that's the option for people to stay. But that's also, I guess, for the actual owner in case they decide that after the first 5 years they don't want to continue with SDA.
Yeah, and that's the question I had in terms of the care providers. Oh, there's a bit of feedback there.
Sure, yeah, not sure that. Yeah, look, in terms of multiple providers in a house, I've seen that. Yeah, I've seen that. We're at this stage, we're not really considering that. And I think it's sort of like touching on, what Nicole said earlier about the industry knowledge, having that real insight into the industry gives you a lot more confidence in knowing which are going to be the right care providers for the residents, who's delivering the best sort of care to make sure that the environment in the home is what essentially you're looking for, so the tenants can stay there long term and are comfortable staying there long term. But at this stage, multiple providers in a house.
You can't have more than one SIL provider in a house. Yeah. So there's only one SIL provider. People can have their own community access providers.
Yes.
So where they have different services that come in and take them out for the day, and they might be providers that they've worked with for 20 years, and they want to keep them on board. But you can only have one SIL provider in the house. The only difference to that is if there's individual living options, which is a bit of a different type of funding, which mostly has been used in Western Australia, but we are seeing it a little bit more in the states where some people actually have like a lead tenant, which is someone who provides the overnight care, living on site. And it could be a friend of theirs, it could be someone that they've all just decided to hire, and then have drop-in supports during the day. So there's a few things that are starting to pop up, a bit more innovation and a bit more flexibility for people, which is fantastic. But in terms of the actual provider that is responsible for the house, there can only be one in a SIL SDA property.
Okay. So, Joe, or maybe it's Goro. Joe, in terms of the design and the actual properties itself, how different is it to your normal stock standard 4-bedroom single story?
Look, I guess the main difference, I'll point out the main difference is you have a little more wheelchair accessibility into the kitchen. So over under bench covered access. We've done some adjustable bench tops as well. But I'd say the main point of difference is you'll find that the hallways are wider, the doors are wider, the bathrooms are a lot bigger, the bedrooms are a lot bigger.
I think we should give perspective. A normal 4-bedroom house is 18-20 squares.
Yep.
We're talking squares since we're in a property development forum. Joe, how big are our larger houses at the moment?
Our largest high physical, you're looking at around about 28 squares. So we're kind of, we're kind of getting closer to 30 squares at the moment. Yeah.
To give you an idea, that's the amount of size. You require 1.5 times the size of a regular 4-bedroom house. Not just to meet compliance, that's one thing. You can meet compliance, and a lot of the people that are just meeting compliance are on the verge of honestly getting banned at the moment. I'm really, really afraid for them. We're talking functionality, because compliance and functionality, as we talked about, are two different things. With the background from Nicole, Joe really took that on and created a design that's really is 1.5 times larger than a normal 4-bedroom house. So it's not something that's easy to done, and it's not like you can scale to multiple levels either. So you have to have a significant amount of land.
And what's the minimum size?
At this stage, we're looking, I'd say about a 512. A 512, a 16 by 32 is sort of fitting the design pretty well. Yeah.
Okay.
And one of the main, sorry, Cheryl. I was just going to say, one of the main things too that we really wanted from the beginning was to have houses that actually fit into the community and they don't stick out like a sore thumb, like the old, Department of Human Services houses. They very much are seamless within the community, and it's creating, I guess, that level of, a bit of confidence for the owner as well, that they could resell that house if anything went pear-shaped for them. But also it gives people who are living in the community and want to live in the community, I guess, a little bit of normality in wanting to, have surroundings like everybody else, be able to get out in the community like everybody else, live in accessible communities where they can get out and they can get on a bus and they can go, wherever they want. They can get out and explore parklands in a lot of new estates. Even a lot of where we've built a lot of the, like they're having like aquatic centres that are all completely accessible, which is wonderful. Some of our tenants have got memberships at the local, like, what would you call it, Joe? Like a
local residents clubs. So yeah, they're sort of things that we've looked at in terms of our location. Obviously, you know, the new communities that we have gone into, we've tried our best to find new communities that are kind of on the cusp of already established communities. We're not really sort of going out to too far, like say for Melbourne, for example, out to Mickleham or Maryfield or anything like that. That's we're kind of trying to stick to Epping North, for example, in the northern region, or Craigieburn, just to try to provide those levels of amenities, shopping centres, movie complexes, aquatic centres. They're the sort of things that our participants really sort of really enjoy doing in their free time during the day when they're not sort of doing their their day placement or just sort of spending the day out with their housemates.
Yeah, and so how are you sourcing? How are you sourcing the land and where you're building?
Yeah, like it's part of my role. I've mainly just speaking to the local the local agents, the local land agents, or the established agents alike. That's typically just we know what we're looking for and just trying to find the best one that suits us. Yeah.
Okay, I've just got a few comments from the group as well. So one, Peter has asked, have you explored manor housing to create a community and independence option?
Manor housing, the greatest challenge with manor housing is that it's usually 2 stories, 3 stories is sort of the norm for housing. Obviously, people with special needs, it's a challenge to build anything more than 1 story because then you've got to put lifts and stairs, right? So obviously the space and price constraints to add more levels is a challenge. What we have done in some of our lower level disabilities is really almost created. We looked at the rooming housing strategies and said, okay, how do we use this for people with special needs? And we created 4-bedroom, 4-bathroom options that really were modeled on best practice rooming, right? And that seems to be working really well for us. So instead of manor housing, we've really looked at almost modifying a rooming housing design. The other thing we would be keen on looking at, if someone in the group's keen to work with us, is really we want to look at building cluster housing, which is really, for lack of a better term, it's a townhouse development that's single story. That we do get some more requirements for people who want to live a little bit closer in, who are more independent. Now, these aren't people with the highest level of funding. They've usually got something like fully accessible. So don't expect, you'll get hundreds of thousands of dollars for one house, because that's not going to happen. But you will get, double, maybe triple the market rent. That's something that is an explorable possibility.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some of that, that manor kind of housing is what we would call supported residential services, where a lot of people went out, 10, 15 years ago and bought old nursing homes, and they turned them into SRSs, which is it's people with varying types of disabilities, and anyone who has really more than mild intellectual or mental health issues generally wouldn't be able to fit into those sorts of services. So a lot of time what was happening, and this is one of the reasons we started down this track, is that people would be in those types of housing, and something would happen. Either their disability would get worse and they would end up with higher physical needs and end up in hospital, and then become homeless because they can't actually go back to those sorts of services, because there is no, as much as there's 24/7 support, it's usually say 1 to 2 people to say 20 people living in that service. So there's no real individual support unless someone else is coming in and providing the support anyway. And a lot of that is where there's been a lot of abuse and neglect in those types of services and those types of dwellings as well. So as much as it seems like sometimes to the outside world that would mean that they're more independent, a lot of the time it's actually not. It's actually creating quite a lot of actually tenant to tenant abuse as well, and that kind of congregating and I guess what people would sort of say of keeping people away from the rest of the community. So we really wanted something with a more family feel that was almost, I know when I moved out at sort of 21, I moved in with 2 friends, and that was affordable for our bills. It was affordable for our rent to share. and it meant that we were together, we were safe. You know, we chose who we lived with, and kind of, I guess, had that more of a family feel where everyone kind of, you know, ate together and cooked together and that sort of thing. But you could go to your room and spend time by yourself if you wanted, or a different area of the house if you wanted. And that's kind of what we wanted for people. And that was the feedback that we got from most of our actual participants of what they actually wanted.
Yeah.
So, you know, they didn't want to live by themselves, most of them, but they also didn't want to live with a lot of people where they felt like they got lost.
Yeah.
So do each of the rooms have their own ensuite as well as its shared bathroom?
In the design that
Was
Goro
that, sorry?
previously, the improved livability design, each bedroom has a bathroom, has its own ensuite. In the high physical design, we've got 3 participants and 2 bathrooms. So well, that is for the actual participants, right? So they don't have an ensuite to each room, but that is more a functionality issue more than anything. We have previously looked at having three bathrooms per participant in that category, but the feedback that we've had is that due to the level of care that those participants require, it's actually not a real functional. There's no real point functionally due to the fact that you know, 1 carer or 2 carers would only physically be able to actually shower a participant at once, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So okay.
Bathrooms to be a lot bigger to be functional, even beyond what the regulations are. And
that too. Yeah.
Earlier today, all 3 of us, right, Nicole?
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the, you know, especially for the high physical support, the people that we're seeing actually get high physical support SDA funding are very, very high needs, complex people who require 2 people to shower them at a time, and they need hoists in the bathroom and, you know, big shower chairs and things like that. It would almost be compromising living space to be able to have 3 massive bathrooms for people. Whereas, you know, being able to have sort of, you know, the 2.5 baths, which is what we generally have in most of ours for the high physical, compared to the improved livability where someone can actually either shower themselves or just have someone prompting them to shower, or potentially just one staff member helping them. En-suites are fantastic in that case, absolutely, and we wouldn't compromise on not having en-suites in every room in that case. But with the really high physical complex people, you know, 2 people plus someone with a disability in a massive shower chair, you wouldn't be able to get something that was functional for the size of
bathrooms are bigger than our bedrooms in some cases.
Yeah.
That's the reality.
So all right, so we know all the things that are not as easy as they seem. So, but what done well, and you guys have done this well, why is it still, are you able to balance that sort of the social impact with a great investment? What do the numbers look like there?
So what we've done instead is we used to do it as a build it and they'll come approach, which is what the NDIS propaganda tells us. I'll call it propaganda because you know, it's now we take it, let them come, get the feedback, and then we'll build it. So we're doing it the reverse way around. So when we say we want to build it in a certain area, that's because we've gotten to our business to such a level where people are approaching us saying, hey, we want to live here, here, and here. Do you have anything? And if you don't, hey, then, you know, Joe and myself, we get onto the 10 property side and we market it through 10 properties to build it. Only once we have expressions of interest of residency in hand. Right?
Okay.
And we've done the tenant matching. Right? That's the way to do it right. Not just build it and they'll come. We learned the hard way. You know, I between my dad and myself, you know, full disclosure, we own 10 of these. We only, you know, it has been a very, very challenging journey. And the only way to be successful is to work with an SDA provider that knows what they're doing.
Yeah. And so give us some examples of what the numbers would be like. So if it was an investor, so what we're saying is you've got an investor that purchases, who's I guess the landlord, the owner of the property.
Yep.
What are these people purchasing for, and what sort of returns can they expect to get?
There's a few different mixes, and obviously, you know, if someone's keen to do a cluster development with us, the numbers are going to be different. But typically, when we're building an improved livability house, we'll pay out a net income of 45,000. When I say net, they still have to factor in their holding costs and the mortgage. That's after management fees. They'll get paid 45,000 based on 3 residents living in the house. At a high physical support, we'll pay out 75,000 because typically in those houses we have a mixture of high physical and fully accessible living in that houses, and we take the risk on that, right? So we'll pay out 75. I know it doesn't sound like the hundreds of thousands that some other providers are promoting, but the reality is we don't get that much compared to what actually happens out there.
So is this the SDA provider taking a head lease, or is this just only
It's a head lease, and we pay out per participant in the house. So when I say 75, that's divisible by 3. We pay out 25,000 per participant in the house. And really, if you want to compare apples with oranges, is what it is. Improved livability is really comparable almost to rooming housing numbers. So if you're on the fence about improved livability or rooming housing, unless there's a significant demand, my suggestion is go speak to Ian, go speak to Rob, go speak to one of these guys that knows what they're talking about when it comes to rooming housing and building with them. If you want to be a professional investor, know that it's going to take extra engineering. You're going to have valuation shortfalls, but once a resident's in there, they're likely to stay very long term. Come back to us, and we'll talk about high physical support or improved livability or a cluster model. That's the way forward.
And on what is the price ranges of these properties for someone to purchase?
So for improved livability in Melbourne, you're looking roughly mid to high 6s, roughly. In Brisbane, we're sort of doing it early to mid 5s. High physical.
Including the land, by the way.
Sorry?
It's including the land, by the way.
Yeah. So high physical, we're in Melbourne. We've got a couple of placements that have just opened out. We're sort of talking 850 to 9. And Brisbane, we're sort of 750 to 8.
Yeah. And then netting before taking out your loans and things like that, what are they on average netting?
High physical was 75,000, and for the improved livability is 45.
Yeah. So Brisbane's 9-10% yield. Melbourne's about 8% yield on the 8-9% yield on the high physical support. That's what we're talking about. But these spots are super limited, right? When I say limited, we have our tenancy process. So if someone came to us today and said, "Hey, I want to do a high physical," I'd say, "Look, I've got one spot left in Lilydale, and I've got one spot left in Doherty, and that's all I have. If you want to build in Werribee, if you want to build in some of those other areas, unfortunately, we can't do it." And likewise with Brisbane, Brisbane is about to be flooded with a glut of very, very small high physical support houses, and we don't want to build too many more.
Yeah, like it's that, I guess thank you for bringing that up, Goro, because that's actually something that we take very seriously. We actually only offer these on a placement arrangement because we know and we're committed that we need to follow through on the tenancy. There isn't like an unlimited amount of these that we will commit to building. So I guess that's been something that's really worked well for us. So just to know that sort of you're working with an organisation that's going to actually be following through and committing to the outcome that's that's being promised to you.
Yeah.
So,
we do it in New South Wales. So if someone's got some good land in New South Wales, we could look at that. That's
yes. So we are looking at going into other states. That's true. But say, for example, if you're looking at what Goro was saying earlier, if you're out west at the moment, you're wanting to build a high physical, we're actually not looking at placements in those areas, those locations. Unless you're sort of coming to, we may be able to do something a bit more specialised, like if you're looking in the Brimbank region, we may be able to do like an opt-down rebuild in that case. But pretty much we're waiting for at least probably I'd say come towards the end of this year, early next year to open up placements out there again.
All right, we've got a few questions here. Martin, I'm just going to finish off Martin's question. How much is the tenant completely government funded?
100%.
Yeah. They
That's
do
an easy.
a little bit of their disability support pension. Let's just play that loosely because sometimes they pay it, sometimes they don't, and quite often we end up paying a lot of their bills. This is the reality. The DSB basically we treat that.
And in terms of funding and valuations, let's talk about that as well.
You will have valuation shortfalls at the high physical support level, probably not at the improved livability level, due to things like, I mean, you've got roughly about $20,000 for a fire sprinkler system allowance, right? That just, valuers are not going to value that up, right? So yes, you may have to present it as a regular property. Expect, if you're presenting it to the bank as a regular property, we tell people to expect, you know, roughly a 6 to 7% valuation shortfall. In Melbourne, roughly about a 10% val shortfall in Brisbane and other areas. And I dare say it would be at least 5% val shortfall in Sydney.
Yeah, alrighty. And funding-wise, is it mainly the banks or do we have to look at private funding? What's the situation there?
Banks can fund it, but you have to present it to them pre-modification. What we do is we go in and sort of present it to the bank as a I guess a regular house and land. It's a spec, and then even though there's fire sprinkler systems, they don't really care as long as they're able to secure the property. But if you say, "Hey, I'm building SDA," they're not going to secure that property.
Yeah, right. Okay, I'm just going to see if there's any more questions because I know there's plenty, but we're pretty much up with time, and I really appreciate the amount of input that you've provided here. I think you've covered a lot, but if anyone's got any questions before we close up, Peter says, how does the bank view serviceability as income?
Like a normal house.
Yeah.
So if you're getting, you know, in Sydney, you're getting what, $500 a week rent in that area. For a four-bedder, you have to present it as a $500 a week rent. Where you can utilize the serviceability in some cases is if you're about to build your next property and you've got 6 months worth of rent coming in on this one, then you can utilize that to increase your serviceability, you know, moving forward in the future.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. Peter mentioned here with cluster housing, does this need one-to-one supports or can it be shared to solve the funding issue with just one SDA client? I'm not sure if I understand that question, but maybe.
It would depend on what the style of the build is, I think.
I think cluster housing is really more that townhouse. Nicole, you were chatting about that earlier. Really, it's still the one still provider, right?
Yeah, generally what happens, it would still be the one still provider, unless people have got, which isn't really happening much because people aren't getting funded for it, but some people can maybe have drop-in supports. But generally what it would be one still provider who would have 24/7 support on site. It would depend on what the individual people actually need, and that's in their supported independent living quote of how much actual supports they need. So some people need a high level of care, some people don't need as much. So I would think that those cluster builds would probably be a bit of a hybrid in terms of you might have some high physicals, some, you know, some improved livability and some fully accessible within that cluster, I would assume. Probably one of the other things that I would mention that in terms of where the market's going is that some of the big providers that, you know, most people would know are household names like, you know, Urella and Scope and all those big providers. What's happening is they're realizing they're going to start losing their participants that have already been living in their houses for, you know, 10, 20 years. And people are seeing these, you know, beautiful new shiny SDA properties and apartments and, you know, things being built. So what's going to happen now, and we're already seeing it, is providers coming to us to build for them, which means that then they have some control over moving some of their tenants out that may have got what's called legacy funding, which means if they were already living in this type of accommodation, they were given really, really low levels of funding. So it's actually attractive for them to then move those people out, but they won't do that unless they're keeping the actual supported independent living funding and working on site with those people. So I think that for the general market, without those connections and without those networks, they're going to be flooding a market that's going to be pretty empty pretty soon.
Yeah. And I've just got another question here. Dave is asking if you provide initial consultancy for a feed. So David Ng, who's in our community, he's the director of community homes, and he's doing a lot of amazing work in Brisbane. You may or may not have seen him, but after this call, Goro, if you could hop onto the comments section to see if there's anything that I've missed, because I can't see all of them. But it would be really great if you could connect with David, because he's doing some really good things, and it would be really great for you guys to obviously connect as well. Peter, and I'll make this our last question here. We have an issue. We get lots of one-off SDA people. We can't place as most homes. We need 2 or more. We have an issue of we get lots of one-off SDA people we can't place. Did I read that right?
Yeah, we faced a similar issue as well. Was it David that asked the question? Yeah, we faced a similar.
Peter, sorry.
Peter, my apologies. Yeah, Peter, we faced a similar issue as well. It was about sort of finding 2 tenants to make a home operational because the NDIS weren't willing to fund one participant living in the home. So thank you for raising that. That was probably one thing that we forgot to mention. Actually, one pretty important thing, actually.
Yeah.
At times we've probably had 20 people that have applied that we could have put in 20 different houses because they did not match in any way, shape or form. So it's definitely hard. We've been really lucky to be able to build a couple of houses in each of our areas. So they've had a lot more choice than what a lot of other providers have probably got as well.
Okay, all righty. So I think you're gonna have lots of questions that will probably continue on the Facebook group. So I just want to say a huge thank you from the community for all of you to have asked questions as well, for the input from the 3 of you, because I think you have done amazingly to be able to set something up like this and to really give it some amazing structure. But then, you've only got to this point because you have been specialists and experts in this area. So well done. I think there are quite a few people that want to get in contact with you. What's the best way to reach out, Goro?
Drop a Facebook message, get in touch with yourself, get in touch with ourselves. You can dial the 1300 number, but honestly, it's easier just to drop us a Facebook message or even drop me an email. I'll put it in the comments here.
Yeah.
That's the best one, goro@empoweredliveability.com.au. Drop me an email. Happy to field reasonable questions. If you say you want to put money in to build hundreds of houses, I'll be rolling my eyes and saying probably not the right industry. But if you really, if you've watched this presentation and you really want to build, 1 or 2 houses and you want to have that sort of long ongoing income done right with the right due diligence, then yeah, contact us.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Thank you, Nicole, Joe, Goro, and everyone else who provided some really great input here and some questions. This will be this has been recorded, so it will be on the Facebook page, and I'll share it across to anyone else as well. Thanks, guys.
All right,
Have a good evening. See you later. Bye.